6 months had passed since Earth fell and the world had become unrecognizable. Where cities once stood, the Vrathan had built their processing centers and mining facilities. Humans worked in these facilities 18 hours a day, extracting resources that were loaded onto massive cargo ships bound for other parts of the Vrathan Empire. The shock devices on their wrists ensured compliance. Step out of line and pain would bring you back. Jin-Ho had avoided capture through a combination of skill and luck. He had been part of an elite special forces unit before the invasion, trained in survival and stealth operations. When his unit was wiped out, he had gone to ground in the mountains. For 6 months he had watched and learned. He studied Vrathan patrol patterns, memorized their shift changes, and discovered their blind spots. He survived on scraps and rainwater, waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment came on a cold October night. A Vrathan supply convoy was moving through a mountain pass carrying weapons and equipment. Jin-Ho had spent 3 weeks preparing the ambush, placing explosives at key points along the route. When the convoy reached the narrowest part of the pass, he triggered the charges. The explosions sent rocks cascading down onto the vehicles, blocking the road ahead and behind. The Vrathan soldiers scrambled out of their transports, weapons ready, searching for targets. But Jin-Ho was already gone, melting back into the darkness. The convoy sat there until morning, when reinforcements arrived. By then, half the supplies were missing, taken by someone who knew exactly what would be most valuable. The Vrathan found only footprints that led nowhere and vanished into solid rock. Inside one of the Vrathan mining facilities, Youngie worked alongside 100 other humans, extracting rare metals from the Earth. She had been an engineer before the invasion, designing power systems for orbital stations. Now she used those same skills to keep Vrathan equipment running. But Youngie was also watching, learning how their technology worked. Every machine she repaired taught her something new about their weaknesses. She noticed that the Vrathan armor, though incredibly strong, had a flaw in its power distribution. The armor drew energy from a central core, and that core was vulnerable to electromagnetic pulses. A strong enough pulse could shut down the armor completely, leaving the soldier inside helpless. Youngie began to carefully document this weakness, hiding her notes in places the Vrathan would never think to look. One night, she was approached by another worker, a teenage boy named Sung-Woo. He was thin from malnutrition, his eyes carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much. He whispered that he knew she was planning something and he wanted to help. Youngie tried to deny it, but Sung-Woo was persistent. He told her about the whispers spreading through the facility, stories about the Reaper who hunted Vrathan soldiers in the dark. Sung-Woo had lost everything in the invasion. His family, his home, his future. The only thing keeping him alive was the hope that someday the Vrathan would pay for what they had done. Youngie looked at this boy and saw the same fire she felt inside herself. She agreed to let him help, knowing that she might be sending him to his death. The Reaper's attacks were becoming more frequent and more bold. A high-ranking Vrathan officer was found dead in his quarters, 3 floors up in a secured building with no sign of forced entry. Security cameras showed only static at the time of death. Another officer died when his transport exploded, even though it had been inspected minutes before. The Vrathan increased security, doubled patrols, and instituted stricter curfews. Nothing helped. Commander Vexrel reviewed the reports with growing frustration. His superiors were demanding answers. How could a defeated species continue to cause so much trouble? The humans should have been broken by now, accepting their new place in the Empire. Instead, they were fighting back with increasing coordination. Someone was organizing them, teaching them, giving them hope. That someone had to be found and eliminated. In a hidden bunker beneath the ruins of Seoul, Kyung-mi met with her cell leaders. They represented groups scattered across the globe, each one fighting their own small war against the Vrathan. But tonight was different. Tonight they had a guest. A figure in black tactical gear stood in the corner, face hidden by a hood. No one had seen him enter. One moment the room was empty except for the resistance fighters, and the next moment he was simply there. Kyung-mi had been communicating with the Reaper for months through encrypted messages, but this was their first face-to-face meeting. Or it would have been if she could see his face. The hood remained in place, casting shadows that seemed deeper than they should be. When he spoke, his voice was distorted by some kind of device, making it impossible to identify. He shared tactical information that was astonishingly detailed. Vrathan base layouts, security protocols, command structures, supply routes. He knew things that should have been impossible for a human to know. When someone asked how he had obtained this information, the Reaper simply said he had his methods. Then he shared something even more valuable. Young A's discovery about the Vrathan armor weakness. The Resistance had captured Vrathan weapons before, but they were coded to their original users and wouldn't fire for anyone else. But with this new information, they could potentially disable Vrathan soldiers and take their equipment. The Reaper produced a device no bigger than a phone that could generate the electromagnetic pulse needed. He had made 3 of them and provided instructions for making more. Kyungmi studied the device carefully. This changed everything. With this, they could actually fight back instead of just surviving. She looked up at the Reaper and asked the question everyone wanted answered. Who was he? How had he survived? Why was he doing this? The Reaper was silent for a long moment. Then he said simply that he was someone who refused to accept defeat. He was someone who believed humanity deserved better than slavery. He was someone who would fight until his last breath. That was all the answer he would give. Before anyone could press further, he moved toward the exit. Kyungmi blinked, and he was gone as if he had never been there at all. 3 weeks later, the Resistance launched their most ambitious attack yet. They targeted a major Vrathan command center in what used to be Berlin. Using the electromagnetic pulse devices, they disabled the guards and breached the facility. Young A and Sungwoo were part of the team, along with Jinho and 24 other fighters. The plan was to plant explosives in the facility's power core and escape before it detonated. Everything went perfectly until they reached the core. A Vrathan officer had anticipated the attack and laid a trap. Blast doors sealed the exits and reinforcements poured in from hidden passages. The Resistance fighters found themselves surrounded, outnumbered 5-1. Jinho prepared to make their last stand, knowing they would at least take many Vrathan with them. Then the lights went out. In the darkness, screams echoed through the facility, not human screams. Vrathan soldiers crying out in fear and pain. When emergency lighting flickered on seconds later, half the Vrathan were down. The Reaper stood in the center of the room, moving like death itself. He fought with a precision that didn't seem human, every movement economical and deadly. The remaining Vrathan soldiers opened fire, but the Reaper was never where their weapons pointed. He moved between them like smoke, and wherever he passed, soldiers fell. Jinho and the others could only watch in awe. They had heard the stories, but seeing the Reaper in action was something else entirely. Within 2 minutes, every Vrathan soldier in the room was disabled or dead. The Reaper turned to the Resistance fighters and gestured toward an alternate exit he had apparently scouted earlier. They planted their explosives and escaped through maintenance tunnels while the Reaper covered their retreat. The command center exploded just as dawn broke over Berlin, sending a pillar of fire into the sky that could be seen for miles. Commander Vexral watched the footage of the Berlin attack over and over. His hands trembled with rage. The Reaper was real and he was dangerous. More than that, he was giving the humans hope. Vexral composed a message to his superiors, requesting reinforcements and elite hunters. The humans thought they had a champion. He would show them what happened to champions who defied the Vrathan Empire. They arrived in ships painted the color of dried blood. The Koraks were the Vrathan Empire's answer to problems that ordinary soldiers could not solve. They were hunters, trackers, killers bred and trained for one purpose: to find those who thought they could hide and eliminate them. Their leader, Thexnor, had never failed a hunt in 30 years of service. He stood on Earth's soil for the first time and smiled behind his helmet. This world would be no different. Thexnor began systematically. He studied every report of resistance activity, mapped every attack, analyzed every pattern. The humans had multiple cells operating independently, but they all seemed to receive guidance from one source, the one they called the Reaper. Find the Reaper, and the resistance would collapse like a house built on sand. He divided his Koraks into hunting packs and sent them out with one directive: bring me the hooded one, alive if possible, dead if necessary. The first resistance cell fell within a week. The Koraks tracked them to a bunker in the Australian outback and struck at dawn. The humans fought bravely, but they were no match for hunters who had brought down prey on 100 worlds. Thexnor interrogated the survivors personally, but they knew nothing useful. The Reaper had never revealed his location, never met them directly. All communication had been through encrypted channels. J1 watched the reports of destroyed resistance cells with growing dread. He had been a scientist before the invasion, working on classified military projects in a laboratory buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. The project had been codenamed Thanatos, and its purpose had been to create the perfect soldier. He had left the project years before the invasion, troubled by the ethical implications. Now he wondered if his creation had survived. He was part of Kyung-mi's cell now, using his scientific knowledge to develop weapons and analyze Vrathan technology. But watching footage of the Reaper in action stirred memories he had tried to forget. The way the Reaper moved, the precision of his attacks, the almost superhuman reflexes. These were all characteristics Thanatos was designed to produce. Could it be possible? Bora had been a fighter pilot before the invasion, one of the best. She had shot down 7 Vrathan fighters before her plane was destroyed, and she barely escaped with her life. Now she flew supply runs for the Resistance, piloting salvaged aircraft through Vrathan-controlled airspace using every trick she had ever learned. She was good at staying alive, but even she knew her luck would run out eventually. She was making a supply run to Kyung-mi's cell when she first met the Reaper in person. Her plane had been damaged by Vrathan anti-aircraft fire, and she crash-landed in a forest 20 miles from the rendezvous point. She was preparing to hike through the night when a figure appeared from the darkness. At first she thought it was a Vrathan soldier and reached for her sidearm. Then she saw the black tactical gear in the hood. The Reaper checked her injuries with practiced efficiency. She had a broken rib and a concussion. Nothing life-threatening but enough to slow her down significantly. Without a word, he produced a medical device from his pack and ran it over her injuries. Bora felt warmth spread through her chest and the pain faded to a dull ache. When he was done, she could breathe normally again. She stared at the device in amazement. It was technology far beyond anything she had seen, even in military hospitals before the war. The Reaper helped her to her feet and led her through the forest. He moved silently, his steps leaving barely a trace. Bora, who prided herself on her stealth training, felt clumsy by comparison. They reached the rendezvous point before dawn. The Reaper handed her off to Kyung-mi's team and then vanished back into the forest without saying a single word. Bora touched her ribs where the pain had been and wondered what kind of man hid under that hood. Thexnor was patient, but even his patience had limits. 5 more resistant cells had been destroyed, but the Reaper remained elusive. Every time the Corax got close, he slipped away like water through fingers. Thexnor began to suspect that the humans had help, perhaps from rogue Vrathan or another alien species. No human should be able to evade his hunters this effectively. Then he got the breakthrough he needed. One of his packs intercepted a supply convoy and captured its guards. Under interrogation, they revealed that the Reaper's main group was hiding in an old military bunker in the Himalayan mountains. Thexnor gathered his best hunters and moved with speed. He would trap the Reaper in his own den and end this hunt once and for all. The bunker had been built during the Cold War, designed to withstand nuclear strikes. It had miles of tunnels and multiple entrances, but Thexnor had them all covered. He sent his hunters in from 3 directions simultaneously, driving the humans deeper into the complex. His tactical display showed the Reaper's group retreating to the deepest level, where there was only one way out. Perfect. Daewon fought alongside his former crew members in those dark tunnels. After being freed from the Vrathan facility, he had joined Kyung-mi's resistance and found new purpose. Now he faced the Corax and understood why they were feared. They fought with coordination that made ordinary Vrathan soldiers look clumsy. Every time the humans set up a defensive position, the Corax flanked it or forced them to retreat with superior firepower. They fell back to the central chamber, where Kyung-mi was coordinating the evacuation of civilians and wounded fighters. There were children in the bunker, families who had nowhere else to hide. Daewon knew they couldn't evacuate everyone in time. The Corax would be here in minutes. He prepared to make a last stand, buying time for the others to escape. Then the Reaper stepped forward. For the first time since anyone had known him, he spoke without the voice distorter. His voice was rough, like it had been damaged and never fully healed. He told them to take everyone and go, to use the maintenance tunnels on the north side. When Kyung-mi protested, saying they would all die if they left him alone, the Reaper simply shook his head. He said he would hold them off, and his tone left no room for argument. Tae-sung, who had been training with the Reaper for months, stepped forward. He refused to leave. He had seen too many people die, lost too many friends. If this was going to be a last stand, he wanted to be part of it. The Reaper looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Together they would buy the other's time. The Corax burst into the chamber expecting to find cornered prey. Instead, they found two figures waiting calmly in the center of the room. Texnor recognized the hooded one immediately. Finally, after months of hunting, they stood face to face. He ordered his hunters to spread out and surround their targets. This would be over quickly. He was wrong. The Reaper moved faster than Texnor had thought possible. He fought not like a soldier but like a force of nature. His movements almost too fast to follow. Corax hunters fell before they could land a single blow. The young human with him fought bravely but was clearly outmatched. Still he stood his ground, covering the Reaper's blind spots. The battle became brutal. The Reaper was good, but even he couldn't hold off a dozen Corax indefinitely. He took hits that should have killed him but kept fighting. Texnor began to realize this was no ordinary human. The way he healed from injuries, the speed and strength he displayed, these were not natural abilities. This was something else, something engineered. Bora had disobeyed orders and come back with a small strike team. They hit the Corax from behind, creating chaos in their carefully coordinated attack. The distraction gave the Reaper the opening he needed. He grabbed Taesung and fought their way to where Bora's team was holding an escape route. Texnor roared in fury and gave chase, but explosives planted by Jae-won collapsed the tunnel, separating them. In the escape tunnels as they ran from the collapsing bunker, Bora was hit by shrapnel from a Corax grenade. She went down hard, blood spreading across her back. The Reaper didn't hesitate. He scooped her up and kept running, his hood falling back in the chaos. Jae-won, running beside him, saw his face clearly for the first time. The face was heavily scarred, like someone had taken a healthy man and put him through hell. But more striking were the implants visible beneath the skin, glowing faintly with blue light. Cybernetic enhancements ran along his jaw, his temples, probably throughout his entire body. Jae-won's breath caught in his throat. He knew that face, had seen it in project files years ago. The face of the volunteer who had agreed to become something more than human. They emerged from the bunker into the mountain wilderness. The Reaper laid Bora down gently and used his medical device to seal her wounds. She would live. As he worked, others in the group stared at his revealed face. He didn't try to hide it anymore. Jae-won stepped forward slowly, his voice shaking. He spoke a name he never thought he would say again. Hyunwoo. The Reaper looked up, his scarred face unreadable. After a long silence, he nodded once. Yes, he had been Hyunwoo once, before Thanatos, before the invasion, before everything changed. Jae-won fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He apologized over and over for what they had done to him, for the pain he must have endured. Hyunwoo reached down and helped him stand. In a quiet voice, he said there was nothing to forgive. He had volunteered, and he would make the same choice again. Because of what he had become, people were still alive. That was enough. 18 months after the invasion, Earth remained under Vrathan control, but that control was slipping. The resistance had grown from scattered survivors into an organized army. They had weapons, tactics, and most importantly, they had hope. But that hope came at a terrible cost. For every victory, the Vrathan retaliated against civilian populations. Entire work camps were executed as punishment for attacks on military targets. Commander Vexrel had lost patience with subtle approaches. He gathered 10,000 human prisoners in a massive compound near what used to be Paris. Giant screens were erected around the compound, broadcasting to every corner of Earth. His message was simple and brutal. The resistance would surrender the Reaper within 72 hours, or all 10,000 prisoners would be executed. After that, he would gather 10,000 more and repeat the process until the Reaper was handed over. The resistance leadership met in emergency session. Kyungmi looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes from weeks without proper sleep. Daewon paced the room like a caged animal, his military mind trying to find a solution that didn't exist. Youngie sat quietly, her engineering skills useless against this kind of problem. Jae-won studied data on his tablet, searching for any weakness in the compound's defenses. Hyunwoo stood apart from them, his hood back in place. Since his identity had been revealed, he had become more withdrawn, not less. He spent hours alone, training or maintaining his equipment. Taesung, who had become something like his apprentice, was the only one who could get him to speak more than a few words at a time. Now Taesung stood beside him, his young face showing the same grim determination. The debate grew heated. Some argued they should attack the compound and try to free the prisoners. Others said it was a trap and would only get more people killed. A few, though they were ashamed to admit it, suggested that maybe one life wasn't worth 10,000. Maybe Hyunwoo should surrender and trust that the resistance could continue without him. Hyunwoo listened to it all in silence. Then he spoke, his damaged voice cutting through the arguments. He said he would surrender, but not yet. He had one final mission he needed to complete first. If he succeeded, the resistance would have something worth more than his life. If he failed, he would turn himself in as promised. He asked for 70 hours, just 70 hours to accomplish what needed to be done. Kyung-mi wanted to refuse, to tell him no more suicide missions, no more risks. But she looked into his eyes and saw a certainty that couldn't be argued with. She agreed, but only if he took a team. Hyunwoo accepted, knowing that some missions required more than one person, no matter how enhanced you were. He chose his team carefully. Tae-sung, whose loyalty had been proven in blood, Jae-won, whose knowledge of technology was invaluable, and Bora, who had recovered from her injuries and insisted on repaying the debt she owed. The target was the Vrathan Central Intelligence Hub, located in a fortress they had built on the ruins of Geneva. It was the most heavily defended location on Earth, housing not only military intelligence but also the coordination center for the entire occupation. Jae-won believed that if they could access the hub's main database, they could find information critical to winning the war. Maybe even information about the Vrathan Empire's vulnerabilities across the galaxy. They infiltrated the city under cover of darkness, using stolen Vrathan transport codes and forged identification. Bora flew them in on a cargo shuttle, her piloting skills making the flight look routine. They landed in a service area and made their way through maintenance tunnels that Jae-won had mapped using intercepted Vrathan communications. The hub was a tower of black metal and blue lights, rising 20 stories above the surrounding buildings. Vrathan guards patrolled every entrance and sensor arrays covered every approach. Getting in would require more than stealth. It would require a frontal assault. Hyunwoo had planned for this. While his team infiltrated from below, he would draw attention from above. He went in alone, scaling the tower's exterior using equipment that should have been impossible for one person to carry. The Vrathan spotted him halfway up and opened fire. Alarms screamed across the compound. Soldiers rushed to defensive positions, all attention focused on the hooded figure climbing their tower. They never noticed the three figures slipping in through the maintenance entrance far below. Jae-won, Tae-sung, and Bora fought their way through the lower levels. The facility's internal security was formidable, but most of the guards had been pulled away to deal with Hyunwoo. They reached the server room after 15 minutes of running and fighting. Jae-won immediately began hacking into the system, his fingers flying across holographic interfaces. Above them, Hyunwoo had reached the top of the tower and was fighting his way through elite guards. His enhanced abilities let him move faster than they could track, but there were too many. He took hits that cracked his armor and tore through his flesh. The nanobots in his system worked frantically to repair the damage, but even they had limits. He crashed through a window into the tower's command center, landing in a roll that brought him up face to face with a dozen Vrathan officers. They stared at him in shock, this human who had caused them so much trouble. Hyunwoo straightened, his hood torn away, his scarred face visible to them all. He raised his weapon and smiled grimly. If this was his last fight, he would make it count. In the server room, Jae-won was making discoveries that changed everything. The Vrathan Empire was not the unstoppable force they pretended to be. They were overextended, fighting rebellions on dozens of worlds. Earth was just one front in a war that was draining their resources. More than that, the database contained communications showing that other species were watching Earth's resistance with interest. If humanity could hold out long enough, they might not be alone. But there was a cost to this knowledge. Security protocols had detected the intrusion and were locking down the system. Jae-won had minutes at best to copy what he could. He worked with desperate speed while Tae-sung and Bora held the door against incoming guards. Explosions rocked the building as Hyunwoo fought above them, buying them time with his life. Hyunwoo was losing. Even his enhanced body had limits and he was reaching them. Blood ran from wounds that his nanobots couldn't heal fast enough. His vision blurred and his movements slowed. The Vrathan were about to overwhelm him when Daewon burst in with a strike team. The old captain had disobeyed orders and brought reinforcements, refusing to let Hyunwoo die alone. Together they fought their way back through the tower, Daewon supporting Hyunwoo as his strength failed. They met up with the others in the server room. Jaewon had everything he needed, stored on devices strapped to his body. Now they just had to escape. The building was in full lockdown and Vrathan reinforcements were pouring in from across the city. Bora led them to the roof where she had landed an aircraft in a maneuver that defied physics. They piled in as Vrathan soldiers reached the rooftop. The aircraft took off under heavy fire, its shields flashing as they absorbed impacts. They barely made it out of the city before the shields failed completely. Bora set them down hard in the countryside, the aircraft smoking and damaged beyond repair. They helped Hyunwoo from the wreckage. His injuries were severe, worse than anything he had survived before. The nanobots were keeping him alive, but barely. He had maybe hours left. Days if he was lucky. Daewon called for extraction, but Hyunwoo stopped him. There was something he needed to do first. One final act before his body gave out completely. He had Jaewon broadcast a message using captured Vrathan communication equipment. The message went out to every Vrathan facility, every ship, every soldier on Earth and beyond. It showed Hyunwoo's face scarred and bloodied but unbroken. He identified himself as the Reaper and revealed the truth about Project Thanatos, about what humanity had created in preparation for a war they knew was coming. He told the Vrathan that they had made a mistake thinking humans would simply submit. He told them about the intelligence they had stolen, about the rebellion spreading across the galaxy. He told them that Earth would never stop fighting, that every day of occupation would cost them more than they could afford. And then he made a promise. Even if he died, others would take his place. The Reaper was not one man. It was an idea, and ideas could not be killed. The message ended, and Hyunwoo collapsed. They got him to a hidden medical facility where Hana worked with what little equipment they had salvaged. She stabilized him, but the damage was extensive. His enhanced body had been pushed past its breaking point. The nanobots were failing, unable to repair everything at once. He slipped into a coma, his vital signs fluctuating wildly. Outside the medical facility, Daewon addressed the Resistance leadership. He showed them what Jaewon had discovered in the Vrathan database. The revelation spread through the Resistance like wildfire. They were not alone. They were part of something bigger. Earth's fight was inspiring other species to rise up. The Vrathan Empire was cracking. Kyungmi made a decision. They would not surrender Hyunwoo. Instead, they would go on the offensive. Using the intelligence from the hub, they would strike at the Vrathan's weakest points and show the galaxy that humanity would not bow. Vexrel had wanted the Reaper. Now he would get something worse. 2 years after the invasion, Earth was no longer alone in its fight. The intelligence Jaewon had stolen from the Vrathan hub had been shared across resistance networks throughout the occupied territories. Species that had been conquered decades ago saw humanity's defiance and remembered their own lost freedom. Rebellions erupted on 17 different worlds within 3 months. The Vrathan Empire, which had seemed invincible, was suddenly fighting fires on every front. Hyunwoo woke up on a Tuesday morning 6 weeks after his collapse. Hana was checking his vitals when his eyes opened. She called for the others immediately. He tried to sit up and found his body didn't respond the way it used to. The nanobots had kept him alive, but large portions of his enhancement systems were permanently damaged. He was still stronger and faster than a normal human, but the superhuman abilities he had relied on were diminished. He was becoming more human again, whether he wanted to or not. Tae-sung was the first to reach the medical room, and the relief on his face was almost painful to see. The young soldier had grown in Hyunwoo's absence, taking on more leadership roles in the resistance. He briefed Hyunwoo on everything that had happened. The message he had sent had inspired not just humans but dozens of other species. The galaxy was rising against the Vrathan Empire, but there was also bad news. Commander Vexrel, humiliated by the theft of intelligence and the spread of rebellion, had gone mad with rage. He had executed the 10,000 prisoners as threatened and then called for more. He was preparing to launch a massive assault on the resistance headquarters in the Himalayan mountains, bringing every soldier and weapon he had on Earth. He would crush the resistance utterly or die trying. Kyungmi had been preparing for this. Using the stolen intelligence, the resistance had coordinated with other alien species who wanted the Vrathan gone. Ships were coming, bringing weapons and supplies, But they wouldn't arrive for 3 more weeks. The resistance had to hold out until then. Hold against the full might of the Vrathan occupation force with limited supplies and exhausted fighters. Day 1 had taken overall command of the military operations. His experience showed in the defensive preparations. They had turned the mountains into a fortress, using every natural advantage and every trick they knew. But he was realistic about their chances. The Vrathan outnumbered them 5-1 and had superior firepower. This would be humanity's last stand, win or lose. Hyunwoo insisted on joining the defense despite his weakened condition. Hana argued that his body needed more time to heal, that fighting now could kill him permanently. He looked at her with those scarred, tired eyes and asked what good was living if Earth remained enslaved. She had no answer to that. She cleared him for combat, knowing she was probably sending him to his death. The Vrathan assault began at dawn on a cold November morning. Their ships darkened the sky and their soldiers came in waves that seemed endless. The resistance met them with everything they had. Youngi's electromagnetic pulse weapons disabled the first wave of armored troops. Jinho's guerrilla fighters hit supply lines and created chaos in the rear. Bora flew air support with a squadron of salvaged fighters, outmatched but refusing to yield. The battle raged for 3 days. The resistance gave ground slowly, making the Vrathan pay for every meter. Vexrel watched from his command ship, his rage growing with each casualty report. These humans should have broken by now. Any other species would have surrendered. But the humans fought with a desperation that bordered on insanity, as if they would rather die than submit. On the 3rd night, Hyunwoo led a strike team deep into Vrathan territory. They infiltrated through tunnels and emerged behind enemy lines. Their target was Vexrel's command ship. Kill the commander, and the Vrathan forces would fall into disarray. It was suicide. But then again, most of what they had done in the past 2 years had been suicide. They fought through the ship's corridors, leaving a trail of disabled soldiers behind them. Hyunwoo's reduced abilities meant he had to rely more on tactics than raw power. Taesung fought beside him, the student now nearly as skilled as the teacher. Together they reached the command deck where Vexrel waited. The Vrathan commander stood 7 feet tall, his armor decorated with honors from 100 conquered worlds. He had been expecting Hyunwoo. He wanted this confrontation, wanted to crush humanity's symbol with his own hands. He dismissed his guards and sealed the room. This would be between them alone. They fought and it was brutal. Vexrel was strong and experienced, a warrior who had killed more enemies than Hyunwoo could count. Hyunwoo was weakened and damaged, his enhanced body failing more with each exchange. But he had something Vexrel didn't understand. He had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. He fought with the desperation of someone who knew this was the end. They crashed through equipment and shattered displays. Hyunwoo took hits that cracked his ribs and tore his already damaged flesh. The nanobots tried to compensate, but there were too few left and they were failing. He was dying, his body finally giving out after 2 years of pushing far beyond its limits. But if he was going to die, he would take Vexrel with him. He got inside the commander's guard and drove his blade through a weak point in the armor. Vexrel roared in pain and threw Hyunwoo across the room. They faced each other, both wounded, both determined. Vexrel raised his weapon for a killing shot. Hyunwoo didn't try to dodge. He simply stood there, bloodied and broken, and met the commander's eyes. And in that moment, something changed in Vexrel. He saw not a soldier or an enemy, but a person who had sacrificed everything for his species, who had endured unimaginable pain and continued fighting. A person who stood there now knowing he was about to die without fear or hatred, just determination, just an unbreakable will to protect his people. Vexrel lowered his weapon. He understood suddenly that this was what he had been fighting. Not technology or tactics or superior firepower. He had been fighting the human spirit itself, that indefinable quality that refused to accept defeat. He had spent 2 years trying to break something that could not be broken, because it existed not in bodies or weapons, but in the very nature of humanity itself. The commander removed his helmet, something Vrathan officers never did in front of enemies. He looked at Hyunwoo with what might have been respect. He said that he had conquered 63 worlds in his career. He had seen species surrender within days, others fight for months before accepting the inevitable. But humanity was different. Humanity had taught him something he had not learned in 40 years of service. Some species would rather die free than live in chains. Hyunwoo collapsed, his body finally giving out. Bexrel caught him before he hit the ground. The commander called for his medical team, ordering them to save the human's life. His officers stared in shock. Vexral looked at them and saw the same doubt he felt. They had spent 2 years fighting an enemy they now respected more than their own leadership. How could they continue to oppress a species that had shown such courage? Word of Vexral's actions spread through the Vrathan forces like wildfire. Officers began questioning their orders. Soldiers hesitated before firing on resistance fighters. A crack appeared in the seemingly unbreakable unity of the occupation force. When the relief ships from other alien species arrived 3 weeks later, they found a different situation than expected. Half the Vrathan forces on Earth had defected, forming a coalition with the resistance against the hardline officers who still supported the Empire. A civil war erupted within the Vrathan ranks. The reformist faction, led by Vexerel himself, fought against the traditionalists who believed in the Empire's right to conquer. The resistance, now bolstered by alien allies and Vrathan defectors, pushed back against the occupation. Battles raged across Earth for another 6 months, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Vrathan Empire's hold on Earth was broken. Kyungmi stood in the ruins of Seoul, watching as the last Vrathan loyalist forces evacuated the planet. Daewon stood beside her, his arm in a sling from a recent battle. Young-yi and Sungwoo were helping coordinate the reconstruction efforts. Jinho trained new security forces to prevent future invasions. Bora flew transport missions, bringing supplies to devastated areas. The work of rebuilding would take decades, but at least now they had the chance to do it. Yunwoo survived barely. Vexrel's medical team had saved his life, but his enhanced body was finished. The nanobots had completely failed, and his implants were removed to prevent them from killing him. He was human again, completely and permanently. He could never be the Reaper again, but perhaps that was how it should be. The Reaper had been a symbol for dark times. Now humanity needed different symbols of hope and rebuilding. He lived his final months in a small house in the mountains, looked after by Hana, who had become more than just his doctor. Taesung visited often, bringing news of the rebuilding efforts and asking advice on leadership. Yunwoo's body was failing, the damage from 2 years of superhuman combat finally catching up with him, but his mind remained sharp, and his spirit unbroken. On a clear spring morning 3 years after the invasion began, Hyunwoo stood on his porch and watched Earth's sunrise. It was the first sunrise he had truly appreciated in years, free from the hood and... The sky above Seoul burned with colors that had no name. Daewon stood on the bridge of the orbital defense station, watching his fleet die. One by one, the ships that represented humanity's best defense turned into expanding clouds of debris and frozen air. The enemy had arrived 3 months ago with ships that blotted out the stars. They called themselves the Vrathan Empire, and they had come to take Earth. Daewon's hands gripped the command console so hard his knuckles turned white. He had fought in the Mars Rebellion and the Titan skirmishes, but nothing had prepared him for this. The Vrathan ships moved like hunting sharks, their weapons cutting through Earth's defenses as if they were made of paper. His communications officer looked at him with desperate eyes, waiting for orders that Daewon knew would make no difference. Down on Earth's surface, Private Taesung crouched in the ruins of what used to be a shopping district. He was 19 years old, and this was his first real combat. The recruitment posters had shown brave soldiers defending humanity with noble expressions. They hadn't mentioned the smell of burning buildings or the way the ground shook when Vrathan dropships landed. His rifle felt like a toy in his hands as he watched the alien soldiers march through the streets. The Vrathan were tall, with armored bodies that seemed to absorb bullets. Their faces were hidden behind helmets that glowed with an eerie blue light. Taesung had seen them kill his entire squad in less than a minute. He had survived only because he had been retrieving ammunition from a collapsed building. Now he hid and watched as the invaders set up some kind of device in the town square. In a research facility beneath the city, Dr. Hana worked frantically to destroy her data. She was a xenobiologist, someone who studied alien life forms. For years, the government had collected samples from meteorites and deep space probes, and Hana had studied them all. She knew more about alien biology than perhaps anyone on Earth. That knowledge could not fall into Vrathan hands. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, wiping files and melting backup drives. Through the laboratory's reinforced windows, she could see Vrathan soldiers moving through the building above. They were searching for something, and she had a terrible feeling they were searching for her. She grabbed the one physical sample she couldn't destroy, a sealed container with alien tissue that might hold the key to understanding Vrathan weaknesses. She hid it in her jacket just as the laboratory door exploded inward. Above the chaos in the ruins of a military command center, Kyung-mi coordinated what remained of Earth's organized resistance. She had been a commander in the Unified Defense Force, leading special operations across 3 continents. Now she led a ragtag group of survivors who communicated through stolen Vrathan equipment. The news from around the world was all bad. New York had fallen. London was in flames. Tokyo was being evacuated. But the evacuation ships were being shot down before they could leave orbit. Kyung-mi studied the maps on her flickering screen. Earth's governments had surrendered one by one, each hoping for mercy that never came. The Vrathan didn't want surrender. They wanted submission. They rounded up humans like cattle, sorting them into groups for purposes no one yet understood. Kyung-mi had sworn she would die before letting them take her. More importantly, she had sworn to make them pay for every meter of Earth they took. The war lasted exactly 93 days from the first Vrathan ship entering Earth's atmosphere to the final human military base falling silent. Daewon had been forced to evacuate his orbital station, watching it explode behind him as he fled in an escape pod. He crashed in what used to be farmland but was now a wasteland of scorched earth. Vrathan patrols found him within hours. They didn't kill him. Instead, they bound his hands and threw him into a transport with dozens of other captured soldiers. The transport took them to a massive facility that the Vrathan had built in record time. It rose from the ground like a metal mountain, all sharp angles and glowing lights. Daewon was processed like cargo, scanned and tagged with a device that attached to his wrist. The device shocked him when he tried to remove it. Around him, other humans shouted and struggled, but the Vrathan soldiers remained silent and efficient. Taesung had managed to survive 3 weeks on his own, hiding in basements and moving only at night. But hunger and thirst had driven him to take risks, and risks got you caught. Now he sat in a holding cell with 50 other humans, all of them wearing the same shock devices. An older woman next to him whispered that they were being taken to work camps. A young man across from him said he'd heard they were all going to be killed. Taesung didn't know what to believe. Dr. Hana found herself in a different kind of cell, one with equipment and monitors. The Vrathan had identified her as a scientist, and they wanted her knowledge. A Vrathan officer, taller than the soldiers and wearing more elaborate armor, stood before her. It spoke through a translation device that turned its words into cold, mechanical English. It told her she would work for them now, that she would help them understand human biology. When she refused, it simply activated her shock device until she passed out from the pain. On the 94th day after the invasion began, Commander Vexrel of the Vrathan Empire addressed what remained of Earth's population through every screen and speaker on the planet. His translated words were clear and final. Humanity had been defeated. Earth belonged to the Vrathan Empire now. Resistance was pointless. Submission was the only path to survival. He declared that humanity's time as a military force was over. But that same night, something happened that Vexrel had not anticipated. A Vrathan patrol in the ruins of Seoul went silent. When backup arrived, they found the patrol dead, killed with their own weapons. The security footage showed only static and shadows. Then another patrol disappeared in London, then another in Cairo. Within a week, Vrathan soldiers began reporting sightings of a figure in black moving through the ruins, always at night, always just out of clear sight. The Vrathan commanders dismissed these reports as mass hysteria. Humans were a defeated species, prone to superstition and false hope. But the attacks continued. Supply convoys were ambushed. Weapons depots exploded. Officers died in locked rooms with no sign of forced entry. The human prisoners began to whisper about a ghost, a spirit of vengeance that hunted the invaders. They called it the Reaper. Kyung-mi heard these rumors through her resistance network. At first, she too dismissed them as wishful thinking, but then she received a message through an encrypted channel she had thought was secure. The message contained Vrathan patrol routes, security codes, and weak points in their facility designs. It was signed with a simple symbol, a black hood. Kyungmi stared at the message for a long time. Then she smiled for the first time since the invasion began. Perhaps Earth had not lost after all.